It pains me to say this, and I really wish it weren't true, but I think we have to have an honest discussion about how working and living in the US is just not worth it anymore. And no, I'm not talking about this, or this, or this, not this, and definitely not this. Because when you take a look at those aspects of American life, they can be incredibly political. And yes, I have my own personal opinions, but as PMs, we're supposed to look at the world as objectively as possible. And when you take a look at the world through a political lens, things can get incredibly subjective. But you know what's far less subjective? The cost of working and living in the US. And yes, there's definitely still a certain level of subjectivity here too, because while both of these are considered one-bedroom apartments, there's definitely going to be a slight difference in price. So when I say that living in the US is just not worth it anymore, I'm talking about a person living in a big city, working in tech, making good tech money. Because I'm not just cosplaying as a PM at work, I PM my own life. From the clothes I wear, to where I live, the car I drive, hell, even the lunch I just had, I'm constantly thinking about ROI. And over these past few years, and after living in Spain for the past two, I can definitely say that working and living in the US just doesn't have the ROI you think it does.
What?
So today, we're going to take a look at the cost of working and living in the US. But first, let's start with the qualitative, because once I get to the quantitative, none of that will even matter. So let's start with work-life balance, because every company likes to say that they have great work-life balance this, great work-life balance that, we'll give you free lunch, we'll give you free beer, we'll give you free arcade games. And do you know what all of this really means? Retention. They're just trying to keep you at work as long as possible, because the longer you're at work, the longer you're likely to work. So combine this with having to check your emails in the morning and at night, on weekends, you're on call all the time, and pretty soon your life ends up revolving around work.
Don't forget, you're here forever.
And PTO. If work-life balance was actually important to these companies, don't you think there'd be far more PTO? Because recharging your batteries is an essential part of work. So where does the US stand regarding PTO? Dead last. But we're in tech, right? We have PTO, and some of us even have unlimited PTO.
Right.
But for the most part, you're looking at about 14 days PTO. But for a lot of us, those 14 days combine not only your sick time, but also your holidays. So what ends up happening is people come into work dead sick because they don't want to lose any of their PTO. And is that work-life balance? But what happens when you actually want to take time off? Because deadlines don't change and your workload doesn't change. So you end up working about 4 or 5 hours additional the day before you take time off. And when you come back, you have to work additional 4 or 5 hours just to catch up. So with both of those extra hours combined, did you actually take any time off?
I don't think so.
So how do other countries do it? In my experience in Spain, you have about 25 days of PTO. And if you're sick, you're sick. Those days aren't counted against you in PTO because everybody gets sick. And those 25 days of PTO, you could use basically at any time and nobody sweats you. And in my former company, the first 2 weeks of August, the entire company basically shuts down so that everybody can enjoy a summer holiday. And sure, these 10 days are taken away from your 25, but if you actually wanted to take the entire month off, you can, and nobody cares. I mean, can you imagine taking an entire month off in the US? I mean, that's basically unheard of. And just how much do Europeans care about time off to recharge their batteries? So when I first got there, I asked about PTO rollover because, as everybody knows, in the US, if you don't use all your PTO, it just rolls over to the next year. So maybe we can save up a bunch to actually take a month off. So when I first got to Spain, I asked my HR buddy about PTO rollover. She had to actually get back to me because she had to Google what PTO rollover was. And when she finally found out,
No. No, man. Shit.
Shit, no, man. I believe you get your ass kicked saying something like that, man.
Because these companies actually get in trouble from the government if their employees don't take time off. Because this is a society that actually cares about work-life balance. And of course, no work-life balance story is ever complete without talking about crunch. It's pretty much known that the expectation of working in tech is about 60 to 80 hours a week once you factor in all sorts of the checking in emails in the morning and at night, on the weekends, any Slack messages that just kind of pop up after hours. All of those things factor into those 60 to 80 hours a week. And then you have to factor in crunch because certain times there's going to be deadlines that you have to meet. So rather than extending those deadlines, they just make you work a little bit more. And why do you have to work more?
Because of the implication.
And what is that implication? You basically have to do everything the company wants, or you'll be labeled as not a team player or unreliable. Additionally, there's a prevailing attitude in tech, and especially gaming, that it's some sort of privilege to work in this industry. And combined with the boom and bust nature of gaming, where if a game doesn't do well, a lot of people are fired, people are terrified of losing their jobs, so they do whatever they can to seem like a team player and reliable. So they end up working 80, 100 hours, they don't take any time off, they come in sick. So is this any kind of work-life balance? You tell me. So what about crunch in Europe? What do they think? So let me tell you a quick story. When I first got there, I was in charge of revamping a game, and it was going to take a lot of work, so I asked the developers to maybe stay additional 2 hours a day for about 2 weeks, just so we can kind of get ahead of schedule. And in the US, this is absolutely an easy ask because 2 extra hours in the US, it absolutely means nothing. But in Europe, one of the guys came up to me and said, I don't know about these guys, but I have a life, I'm not doing it.
What the hell did you just say?
And I was absolutely shocked because I would have never heard this in the US. But upon thinking about it, I realized that I was the asshole here. I was asking him to work 2 extra hours for 2 weeks straight. I wasn't going to give him any additional pay. And if the game did well, he wasn't going to get a dime. So that's absolutely unreasonable for me to ask. And I think we should all start asking that in the US too.
You're goddamn right.
And I know what some of you are thinking. This kind of mentality is why the US is doing so well and far above everybody else. And while some of this is true, how much of your time, which is essentially your life, have you given to your company? And what exactly have they given you in return?
I don't know.
Because let me tell you a quick story about what I got in return. In 2015, I was the product owner of Racing Rivals, the top grossing racing game on mobile at the time. And of course, at the beginning of the year, the company gave us some revenue targets to hit. But what they told us was that if we go above these revenue targets, all the team would get bonuses, and we really wanted that money.
We're not just doing this for money. We're doing it for a shitload of money.
So I asked the team, we talked it out, and we all agreed that we would shoot for these bonuses. So for the entire year of 2015, we worked like crazy, putting 60, 80 hours a week, almost every single week. And at the end of the year, we brought in an additional $12 million. So at the end of the year, what did we get? Did we get a bonus? Did we get some stock options? Hell, did we even get some time off? No, absolutely not. All we got was this cake. This cake was all the team got for bringing in an additional $12 million.
Man, this is some bullshit!
And of course, there was a lot of excuses as to why the team didn't get a bonus. And I think this is a story worth sharing because it was a hard lesson to learn, but one that's actually really important. Never look after your company's best interests because they damn sure won't ever look after yours. But time off, crunch, and general work-life balance is still a little bit subjective because you'll have all these motivational gurus out here convincing people that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Yeah, but at what cost? Luckily, we can calculate costs. So let's take a look. So let's assume this is you. You're single, working in a big tech company like Google or Facebook, making $150,000 a year in LA. On paper, you're doing extremely well since $150,000 a year ranks you in the top 92 percentile of all Americans. After taxes, your take home is about $8,100 a month, but income is only half the story. Because what about your monthly expenses? Because you work in LA, you want to live close to work because, well, traffic. So you choose Culver City. It's central, a good neighborhood, and relatively affordable. On average, a studio or a one-bedroom apartment costs about $2,500, but you find a good deal at $2,200, and combined with renter's insurance, that's $2,213. Of course, you'll need to furnish your apartment, so let's say you spend $5,000 on a bed, TV, couch, cooking supplies, everything. $5,000 spread over 4 years is about $104 a month. And of course, you'll need a car to get around since there isn't good public transportation, so that's $265 for a reasonable car like a Honda Fit. Then there's gas, car insurance, utilities, home internet, and cell phone. And speaking of cell phones, you'll likely need a phone, computer, and tablet, so that's about $2,600. But spread over 3 years, $72 a month. Oh, and don't forget clothing, on average about $134 a month. Laundry, personal grooming.
Oh, you fucker!
And if you work in tech, making $150,000 a year, I assume you went to college. So on average, student loan debt in California is roughly $21,254. So repayment at 10 years at 4.66 APR, that's about $224. Now credit cards. In California, on average, a person has $6,222 in credit card debt. So with a 2-year repayment plan at 19%, that's about $314 a month. And even though you carry some credit card debt, you'll still want to be financially responsible. So you put money away in savings because you don't want to be one of those 39% of Americans that can't afford a $1,000 emergency. So 5% of your income goes towards emergencies, 3% for a retirement because maybe your company matches toward a 401k, and finally another 2% for a vacation fund. And between office visits, co-pays, and prescriptions, you'll spend on average $212 for medical. And because we've been spending so much time at home, you have Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, and a Costco membership. And because you want to maximize your ROI, you cook every single meal at home, except one. Every week, you allow yourself $40 to go out and spend with your friends. Okay, maybe that's a little bit low, so you'll also budget a little extra every month for entertainment. Lastly, with the pandemic, having a companion may be something you want, and if you do, a pet's monthly food and vet bills is about $150. And after all your expenses, you'll still have about $2,300 left.
I'm rich, biatch!
And so, after being incredibly financially responsible, you can save about $2,300. So that's pretty good ROI, isn't it? And definitely it's nothing to sneeze at. But what about the future? Do you want to buy a home? If you want to buy something around Culver City, be prepared to pay a pretty penny, because the cheapest one-bedroom condo is $450,000. But you'll likely outgrow that if you want a family, so if you want to buy a 2-bedroom, it's $540,000. And if you want to buy a single-family home, you'll likely have to spend at least $900,000. Plus, to avoid private mortgage insurance every month, you'll have to put 20% down. And for a $900,000 home, that's $180,000. So if you're saving $2,300 a month, it'll take you 6.5 years to save up for just the down payment. And homes becoming unaffordable isn't just limited to LA. Most major cities like San Francisco, Denver, and Seattle are all dealing with the same issue. And I know what some of you are thinking. That's living in a big city. Because I have a plan to move into a rural area, buy a small home, and work remote while I collect my fat tech money. And I hate to be the one to burst your bubble, but working remote in a rural area just isn't feasible. Because first and foremost, how are you going to work in your tech job without internet access? Because 27% of all rural households have no access to high-speed internet. Also, if you want to live in a rural area, be prepared to drive a lot further for a hospital. On average, it's almost double the amount of time to the nearest hospital. And in case of emergencies, where seconds matter, that definitely isn't a good strategy. And while we're on the subject of hospitals, what about kids? I'm sure at some point in your life you'll have thought about children. But have you ever thought about how much they cost? Typically in the US, it costs quite a bit depending on vaginal or cesarean birth. And even with healthcare, you're likely going to spend on average $4,500 just to birth a child. So where does the US rank compared to other countries? Terribly. But if we spend so much more in the US, it's because we get better care, right? Nope. The infant mortality rate in the US is higher than in any other developed country. And what's more alarming is that the maternal mortality rate, while dropping in almost every other country, is rising in the US. And of course, having kids is not exactly a one-time payment and you're gone. There's ongoing operational costs. For example, you just had a kid. I assume you're probably going to want to spend some time with this kid. So what about parental leave in the US? How do we rank?
The worst. She's the worst.
And that brings us to childcare. I think we can all agree that one-income families are becoming more and more rare, so most likely you're gonna need childcare. And of course, if you're single raising a kid, you're definitely gonna need childcare. So what are the costs? If we take a look at the national average weekly rates for childcare, even at the lowest price of $200 a week, if you have 2 kids that need childcare, that's $1,600 a month. And how much is $1,600 a month? It's the equivalent of $23,000 off of your gross salary. Now, how does the US compare to other countries? Well, we aren't dead last, but we're still far from good. And why are we far from good? Because other countries, like the Netherlands, have government allowances to reduce childcare costs. And for some families, they can offset up to 94% of their costs depending on their income and number of children. And of course, I haven't even talked about food, clothing, diapers, toys, baby seats, and everything else that comes with having a child. And by no means am I making a moral argument here, because whether or not you have a kid is completely up to you. I'm making an economic and biological argument, because we need kids to propagate the species, we need them for economic production and tax collection. So, when you make it this difficult and this expensive to have kids, is it any wonder that the US has a declining birth rate over the past few years? And of course, there's education. Because if you're going to be a parent, you're going to need to think about how much universities cost for your kids in the future. And while I'm not saying that universities are absolutely mandatory for a good job, because statistics show that someone with a university degree will out-earn someone with just a high school diploma by 74% over their lifetime. So while it's not mandatory, it's kind of necessary. And because it's kind of necessary, guess what shot up? Tuition. And because tuition is so high, guess what else is incredibly high? Student loan debt. And most likely you'll have heard about student loan debt and how big it is. But do you actually know how big it is? Currently, it's $1.7 trillion. $1.7 trillion. I can't even wrap my head around a number that big. So let's break it down. How much is $1.7 trillion? You can buy Amazon outright. But if you just think about it as one company, you kind of don't understand how big it is. Also, you don't understand how big Amazon is. If you wanted to diversify your portfolio, $1.7 trillion can buy you every single car manufacturer in the entire world, minus Tesla. Also, every single airline company in the entire world. But I'm not done. Do you like sports? Because you can buy every single NBA team and every single NFL team. That's how big $1.7 trillion is.
That is one big pile of shit.
But of course, that's debt in a very macro view. As a parent, if you want to send your kid to a very good school, how much does that cost? For you. If you want to send your kid to a good school like UCLA, it's $36,700 to live on campus and $34,100 to live off campus. And if you want to send your kid to UCLA but you live out of state, it's $66,500 to live on campus and $63,900 to live off campus. Hell, parking alone costs $258 per quarter. And if you go during summers, that's $1,032 for 4 quarters. I have a friend, Rosa, who's earning her master's degree in Spain right now. And for her entire program, she's paying 1,034 euros. 1,034 euros is basically only the privilege of parking your car at UCLA for a year. And of course, you're going to have a lot of people out here saying, why don't these kids get a job? I had a job when I was a kid. These kids should get a job to help pay for school.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
Okay, Boomer. For a California resident that wants to go to university and pay the $37,000 it's going to cost, they'll need to find a $48,000 a year job for an 18-year-old.
Oh no, super easy, barely an inconvenience. Great.
So what's likely going to happen is one of two scenarios. One, your child is going to have to end up taking some student loan debt and joining part of the $1.7 trillion club, or you're going to have to start saving money the day they're born in order to help pay for some of this college education. And if you choose to help pay, that's absolutely fantastic because that is an incredible gift to your kids. So at UCLA for 4 years, that's $144,000. So let's take a look at what you need to do. You'll want to start a savings account the day your child is born to take advantage of compound interest. Assuming you had $1,000 of seed money, you'll need to put away $345 every single month at an interest rate of 7% in order to save $144,000. Again, this is per child. And if you can't help pay for your child's education, make sure that you stress the importance of paying back their loans. Because currently, 10% of all student loans in the US are over 90 days delinquent, higher than mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards. So if your kids can't find a job to pay off these student loans,
I declare bankruptcy!
even if they go bankrupt, discharging student loans is extremely difficult due to our bankruptcy laws. So if your kid starts missing payments and their debt goes into default, creditors can garnish their wages, intercept tax refunds, deduct their Social Security payments. Any debt collection fees are added to their loans. The state may even revoke their professional licenses and even private ones like their driver's and fishing license. And of course, their credit is screwed, making everything they want to get, like a car or renting a place, far more difficult. And all of this simply because your child wanted to go to college, to have a better job, and to have a better life.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
But let's say you don't have kids and kids are in the future, so you won't have to bear any of these costs. But there's one cost that everybody will eventually have to bear: healthcare. And like I said, I'm not getting political about whether or not we need universal healthcare, and I don't want to talk about the macroeconomic views of us spending 17% of GDP on healthcare. No, this is only talking about you, your personal P&L, what healthcare costs for you. Because you work in tech, and your healthcare is provided by your employer. But what if you lost your job? Or let's say you wanted to start your own business. What then? I mean, if you're married, you can latch on to your partner's healthcare insurance if they have it. But if they don't, you have to pay for all of that yourself. So what is the cost as a single person wanting healthcare? So in Culver City, for a single guy that's 44 years old like myself, the cheapest plan is Oscar Braun's Simple Select EPO. And you'll have to pay the premium every single month at $309.52. In addition, there's also a max out-of-pocket cost, which is $8,550. And the most expensive plan, Blue Cal Platinum 90 PPO, has a monthly premium of $891.84 and a yearly maximum out-of-pocket cost at $4,500. So at the lowest end, you'll pay a minimum of $3,714, and on the higher end, it's $10,702. And keep in mind, this is without receiving any care, so no doctor's visits, no prescriptions. You're gonna have to pay anywhere from $3,700 to $10,700 just to have, not use, have health insurance. And now for the bad news. What happens if you get sick? I mean, really sick. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but according to the American Cancer Society, 40% of males and 39% of females will develop cancer at some stage in their lives. And here's where it gets really depressing. What's the financial cost of getting seriously sick in America.
Hold on to your butts.
Because if you can't work, the FMLA kicks in, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. But it's only good for the first 12 weeks. So for the first 12 weeks, your employer still has to pay for your health benefits. But it's completely unpaid in terms of salary. And after 12 weeks, do you honestly think your employer is going to keep you paying your medical benefits even though you can't work? Highly unlikely. You're talking about these guys right here. So what's going to happen, very likely, is after 12 weeks, you're going to get let go. And what happens once you get let go? You still want to maintain your healthcare benefits, right? So you have to roll into Cobra, and now you have to pay for all your premiums and out-of-pocket costs on your own. Plus, Cobra charges a 2% premium just as a service fee. Why? Because they can. And now you've lost your $150,000 a year job because you can't work and you still have to pay for all of your bills like your car, food, rent. In addition, now you have to pay for all of your medical bills too, so your premiums and all the out-of-pocket costs. And in the US, 66% of all bankruptcies stem from medical issues. But luckily, you were financially responsible and you were saving about $2,300 for a down payment on a home. Luckily, you didn't buy that home because now you have to use that money to pay to fight for your life. Basically, how long can you manage to stay afloat financially if you're battling a serious illness? So let's say you're diagnosed with cancer on January 1st and you start FMLA that same day. For the most part, your expenses won't change much, but let's take a look at some of the expenses that will. Personal grooming will be zero because, well, hair won't be an issue. And let's assume you paid off your credit cards, so that too will be zero. Since you no longer have income, you won't be putting any money away because all of your savings will be going towards paying your bills. And because you're on FMLA, let's assume your employer pays 100% of your monthly premiums, so that'll be zero as well, at least for the first 3 months. With all of your emergency, retirement, holiday savings, and everything you were putting aside towards buying a house, let's say you have $100,000 in the bank. In the first month, not only will you have to pay your bills, but you also have to pay your health insurance plan's maximum yearly out-of-pocket costs, which is $8,550. Between your hospital visits and treatments, you'll easily reach that amount in the first month. And after your FMLA runs out in April, your employer lets you go. So now you have to pay your monthly premiums plus the 2% service fee Cobra charges. So every month you'll need to pay an additional $315. And as the year goes on, your savings will continue to deplete month after month, and if you still can't work by the end of the year, you'll have to pay your yearly maximum out-of-pocket costs again in January. And assuming you have no additional unforeseen expenses, 18 months after you were first diagnosed with cancer, you will have run out of money. And in a year and a half, you'll have gone from earning $150,000 a year, qualifying you to be in the top 92 percentile of all earning Americans, and having $100,000 in the bank to being absolutely penniless, all because you had the misfortune of being sick in America.
Why are you the way that you are?
And if that wasn't bad enough, consider yourself lucky because you're single. You were able to limit that financial damage to just yourself. But what if you were married? If you get sick, you could actually negatively impact your family's economic well-being for years to come. And yes, I understand this sounds incredibly grim, but if illness does strike, and statistics show that it will for 40% of us, you have to think about your family, because losing a partner and kids losing a parent is bad enough. But do you actually want to take all of your life savings with you? So you may end up having a terrible decision to make. Whether or not you fight to stay alive and potentially ruin your family's economic well-being for years to come, or you don't fight and give your family some financial security in case the worst happens. America is the richest country in the history of the world, yet we have to think about things like this. So what's the alternative? I mean, even in Europe where they have universal healthcare, they can't possibly still pay for all your regular bills, right?
Wrong.
In Spain, if you get sick enough not to work, the employers have to pay 60% of your salary for 18 months, and after 18 months, they reevaluate your situation. And in the Netherlands, your employer has to pay 70% at least for 2 years, because both of these countries and a lot of others, there's a social safety net, because they don't feel that you should be left to fend for yourself just because you got sick. And honestly, at least for me, this is the biggest question that you have to ask yourself. Do you want to live in a country, the US, that at any point in time you can be financially ruined just because you got sick? And I suppose this is where I get a little bit political, if you could even call it that, because I'm absolutely tired of seeing shit like this.
I've worked for like 17 years. I work all the time. I've been paying medical bills on my son for 9 years since he was born. And he was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and has to have insulin every 2 hours. I just got his prescription. It was $1,000. I couldn't pay for it. I now have to go in and tell my 9-year-old son I couldn't pay for it. I work a full-time job. My husband works a full-time job. I work 3rd shift. I go to school during the day. How are you guys making it? Am I the only one struggling? How are you guys doing it?
So why am I talking about these things? I'm talking about these things because I think it's our duty and responsibility to look after one another, because it's damn sure not going to be these guys. Because getting sick can happen to any of us, as it did to my brother. In May of 2016, my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and in less than a year, he passed away. He fought cancer every step of the way, undergoing chemo, radiation, in and out of the hospital a few days every single week, unable to work. From seemingly healthy to gone in less than a year, I know it sounds perverse, but his family was fortunate because his wife had good health insurance through her work. Because if they didn't, my brother's bills and less than a year of fighting cancer and all of the health problems it brought was well over $1 million. So I ask this again for dramatic effect. Do you want to live in a country that at any point in time you could be financially ruined just because you got sick? And finally, I want to talk to the tech community specifically, because if you've been impacted and felt any of the things that I talked about today, you could improve your situation, because a lot of companies outside of the US are hiring like crazy, trying to kind of decrease the skill gap. And right now, they know that the best way to do it is by poaching talent with your skills and also your experience. And a lot of countries like Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands are offering special tax breaks to lure skilled workers over to their countries. So not only will you get paid roughly the same amount you get in the US, but you'll be taxed lower. In addition, you also have better work-life balance, way more holidays. You likely won't have to buy and maintain cars because Europe has fantastic public transportation. If you have kids, they'll get subsidized healthcare. And if they ever want to attend university, it's dramatically less expensive over there. And unless you're moving to London or Switzerland, your rent or mortgage will likely be a lot lower than in San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, or New York. And in places like Barcelona or Amsterdam, you'll be living embarrassingly well on the same amount you spent on rent. Because this is what you're going to get in Barcelona, and this is what you're going to get in Amsterdam. And keep in mind, these apartments aren't just staged for photos. If you're paying $2,200 in rent, most likely they're fully furnished with everything you see in this picture, including pots, pans, and linens. Hell, some of them even include utilities. And of course, you and your family won't be one illness away from catastrophic financial ruin, because most countries in the world believe in a social safety net and universal health care. And look, I want the best for everybody in the US because I'm an American and I'm proud to be an American. But that doesn't mean we can't objectively take a look at what's going on and notice that something is wrong. And I'm not a pessimistic person, I'm just good at calculations. Basically, I took a look at whether or not work-life balance is going to get any better, combined with student loan debt, our healthcare industry, and also our social safety net? Are these things getting any better? I thought they wouldn't. So I decided to leave. And unless they'll get better, I don't think I'll be coming back. And of course, you can stay and fight the good fight, because maybe the next election or the next president or the one after that is going to be the one that changes things. But I was done waiting, so I decided to change things for myself, and I decided to move. So what am I asking here? I'm not asking for you to drop everything and move over to Europe, because that's unreasonable. All I'm saying is that when you're looking for your next job, consider changing your search criteria from just the US to worldwide, because a lot of these companies are still hiring because they need people like yourself. They need experienced and highly skilled people to narrow that gap between them and the US. But this window of opportunity is rapidly closing, because as these companies get better, they'll no longer need people like you. And what happens if this window of opportunity closes? What happens then? What happens if you get sick?